is Kathy L. Murphy, and I've become the quick change artist because I've got a new outfit on, and it's just for you, Theresa Bakken. I've got my favorite Pulpwood Queen scarf on. I was getting cold, so I put on a jacket. I turned the heat up. It's getting colder out. It's the weirdest thing. We are excited to have you here and for your wonderful podcast, I'll mess it up every time.
Desiduratum.
Desiduratum.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Desiduratum. Okay, I've got it. I know how to spell it, but I just haven't got it pronounced correctly. But I'm very excited that you're here. Tell me about this tiara.
My daughter picked this out for me. She saw me on the internet searching around at tiaras, and she said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I have to have a crown." She said, "Let me help you."
It's fabulous.
Yes,
so
thank you.
fun.
I feel very regal. It's also helping my posture because I'm afraid if I wobble too much, I'm going to lose it. So I'm be
I'm going to turn the program over to you, and then when you're ready, I'll jump back in, okay?
Perfect.
So I'm going to hit mute, and I'm going to let you just tell us your story.
Thank you. Thank you, Kathy, so much. I'm just thrilled to be here. Last year I attended and watched everything, just soaked everything up like a sponge, and I couldn't be more excited about coming in this year to host something with an author. So I'll start off by explaining a little bit about what desideratum is. It's a Latin word, and it means that which is desired as essential. So I started the podcast last year, and I've had the privilege of talking to 41 different authors, artists, wordsmiths about their work, their life, their muses, and their essential things. We also showcased narrators and voice artists who, to me, the best word is translate. I recently, with Rebecca Copeland, author, talked about this. And I think that voice artists really translate the author's written words into oral storytelling. As a narrator, one of my favorite author storytellers, one of the novelists that I have been lucky enough to narrate for, is Johnny Bernhard. And she's going to join me today to talk about what inspires her and how she invites readers to witness her characters' transformations, sometimes through epic historical events, through relationships, through our basic needs to be loved and to love. I hope you'll also pick up on her wit and wisdom. One of the reasons that I'm hosting today from inside a study room at a library in Colorado is because Johnny imagined a character who was a librarian in her book, Sisters of the Undertow. And we're going to talk about the experiences of that librarian. But first, I want to walk through a little bit of her bio and her accolades. Johnny is a former teacher and journalist. She's passionate about reading and writing. Her works have appeared in Houston Style Magazine, the Mississippi Press, the International Word Among Us, the Texas Review, and the Cowbird NPR production on Small Town America essays. Her novel, A Good Girl, published in 2017 by Texas Review Press, was shortlisted in the 2015 William Faulkner William Wisdom Writing Competition, the 2017 Kindle Book Award for Literary Fiction, and the Mississippi Institute of Arts and Letters Fiction of the Year Award. It was a nominee for the 2018 Penn Robert W. Bingham Prize and placed in the permanent collection of the Texas State Library and Archive Commission. Johnny's second novel, How We Came to Be, 2018 by Texas Review Press, was named a must-read by Southern Writers Magazine and selected for the 2019 Deep South Magazine recommended reading list. It is the recipient of the Summerlee Book Prize, HM, by the Center for History and Culture at Lamar University. Her third novel, Sisters of the Undertow, in 2020 by Texas Review Press, was chosen for discussion at the 2020 National AWP Conference, the Pat Conroy Literary Center of South Carolina, the Southern Book Festival Humanities, Tennessee, and Words and Music Literary Fest of New Orleans. It was an official selection for the 2020 International Pulpwood Queens Book Club. It was named Best of the University Press's 100 Books by the Association of University Presses. Sisters of the Undertow was placed in the Texas Center for the Book, the State Library Collection, and received first place in the Press Women of Texas Communications Contest. Now, get ready for this. Her fourth novel, Hannah and Ariella, is set for publication by TCU and Texas A&M University Presses on August 1st, 2022. Johnny's going to share more with you about this exciting new novel. It's a thriller told in two separate and very striking point of views with danger and, of course, bravery and heart. And for me, one of her signature elements, memorable women. Many of you know that Johnny was chosen as a selected speaker in the 2020 TEDx Fearless Women series. We're going to ask her to weave some of that wisdom here today. But you might not know that she also supports young writers in public schools through the Letters About Literature program with the Texas Center for the Book and with the Write for Mississippi program. In 2021, she was named a teaching assistant with Gemini Inc. Writing Arts Center of San Antonio and the National TAP Summer Institute 2021. Johnny Bernhard, whose name is German and means heart like a bear, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's my honor to be with all of you and seeing your faces. Oh my goodness, I'm near tears. Much love to all of you. All of you are special in my friendships that I've met along the book road, and we've remained friends despite a pandemic. It's what a thrill. And so a great thanks to Kathy and Mandy for giving us this vehicle to be together today. What a joy.
Thank you. Yes. So I thought we would start, Johnny, and this is, Johnny's been on the podcast with me, and what I typically do is just have a conversation with the author, but I'm usually not live. I usually produce it later to include some of the audiobook. But we're going to kind of go through some of the questions that I would normally ask and what I would do on the podcast to celebrate Johnny's artistry. I thought we would start off by talking about libraries, since I'm in a safe space library right now where all are welcome. When you wrote about the librarian, when you gave your character that career in Sisters of the Undertow, can you tell me why you did that, or why that was important for you?
Well, the original idea came out when my first book launched, and I worked a lot with Kim Davis during that time. Much love to you, Kim. And I really didn't know what to do. I was very green, and I was fortunate that the librarians of Mississippi, Louisiana, and Texas had events for me. And I went to an event in Biloxi, Mississippi, which is within walking distance of the VA center there. And it was a cold January day. And as you all know, we have the idea of expectation, and then there's reality. Sometimes they're very different on the road as a writer. You don't know who's going to show. You don't know if anybody's going to buy a book, but you go and you put on a brave face. Well, my expectation, because I was very new at it, is that I would read from the book and people would buy the book and the librarian would introduce me and we'd have coffee and cookies afterwards. But the reality with that library being so close to the VA hospital and services, it is a library that has become daycare, a safe haven for the homeless veterans and young children that their parents have to work and they can't afford childcare. And so it was an eye-opener for me, because many years ago, I rode my bike to the library. It's changed, just as the job of the librarian has changed. And that Biloxi librarian was the champion that day. She greeted everyone with kindness and dignity and made everyone feel welcome, no matter what walk of life they came from. So to me, a library is the greatest example of democracy, like a public school. You can't get any better. So I didn't sell a lot of books that day, but I got the idea to create a librarian as a character. And that is Sisters of the Undertow.
Yes. So, and when just talking about that experience and how libraries have evolved and changed to meet the needs of the community in different ways, when your character experiences those things that you just described, and you give her, I wouldn't say from the very beginning that she is as kind and open maybe as what you described, but that's one of the things that I think is beautiful about your writing, is that we, through that job and through those experiences and the characters you have us meet with her, she is transformed. And I think that's one of the key themes to the way that you write for me.
The protagonist, Kim, is not a lovable character. She appears arrogant, selfish, cuts people off. She's quite rude, but there's always a reason for someone's behavior. And when we get into Kim's backstory, we learn she's been hurt. And the only real affection Kim shows is to her adopted dog. She's safe with this animal.
Right.
There's no fear of rejection. And so when Kim becomes a librarian in a downtown branch in Houston, which again is frequented by the homeless, all walks of life, she is forced to come out of her bubble and work and interact with people that she's never been with. And that's what life does to us. We could choose to live in a bubble and be with like-minded people and have a very limited view of the world and humanity. Or we can open ourselves up to how other people live and what they experience, and we begin to grow as human beings. So that's Kim's story.
Yes.
Hence the title, Sisters of the Undertow. There's a lot of allusions or symbolisms related to water. Of course, there's a hurricane, Hurricane
Yes.
Harvey. That's the historic content that I put in the book, and the history of hurricanes, beginning in the storm of 1900 in Galveston. And that hurricane, like significant illness or significant suffering from a catastrophe, could be fires, could be a pandemic. It's a catalyst where we have to choose to either be better people because of it, or to withdraw from life because of it. And Kim makes the choice to grow.
Yes. Yes. The hurricane for me is that sort of, it's the pinnacle of transformation for Kim that we see, a literal baptism, if you will, from in her evolution as a person. And I think that also for me is a theme. I'm glad you brought it up, because I think historic elements, epic events, are also a thread or a theme through your storytelling and your writing. In your second novel, or no, I'm sorry, in your first novel, in A Good Girl, you start with a huge family structure, and there's lots of different historic elements to that one. But I'm thinking more specifically about the second one, How We Came to Be. And your character, Leona, lives through part of her life story is the epic historic event of World War II. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about how that experience for her then shapes the other characters in the novel, how you take that historical element and that the research that gives you something specific to peg to, but it's really a seed that impacts all the characters. Can you talk about how you shaped Leona to then shape others?
Leona, as a character, was born out of an experience I had in Budapest 6-7 years ago. I was very fortunate to go, thanks to the generosity of my sister and brother-in-law. And I didn't want to go only because at that time, the first wave of refugees from the Middle East and Northern Africa were coming into Europe. They were welcomed into Germany. They were coming into Hungary, and the Hungarian government stopped them at the tracks when they were onboarding the trains in Budapest and said, no, you cannot stay here. And a group of people are forced to try to enter Russia in October, walking the train tracks.
Mm-hmm.
My husband said, you should go because you don't know what you're going to learn. I would be saddened by it. That's why I wanted to stay away. But my husband was right. When I was in Budapest, it's a very ancient city. It's been sacked many, many times. But Buda is the city itself, or Pest is the city itself, and Buda across the Danube is the beautiful ancient city on the hills. And right on the Pest side of the Danube is a monument to the Jews that were murdered during World War II, and they are bronze shoes, so baby shoes, work shoes, a woman's high heel. And I was so struck by that image of what does it mean when your life is worth a pair of shoes? Your life itself to be living is less because somebody wants those shoes. And I went home and I began researching what happened in Budapest. And that's what gave birth to Leona. So Leona is a woman in her 80s in the book, living in Houston, in a suburb, the Heights, who has experienced a great deal of loss, significant loss in life. Across the street is a 50-year-old woman who's divorced, who likes her wine a lot and feels sorry for herself a lot. And they become friends only because they're alone on a Christmas Eve. And Leona teaches her to grow up. Stop complaining. You don't know what life is really worth. You don't know what loss really is. There again, that's that theme of when you live in a bubble, it's a very teeny tiny world. And so there's some crazy events, sometimes in Austin, sometimes in Houston. This woman, Leona, who lost her family in World War II, gains a family with the main character and her adopted teenage daughter. So that's the title, How We Came to Be. Not who we were in our loss, but how we chose to change through loving others. We created a family, and we all know there's many ways to define family today.
Yes. And I think that was what I was starting to say too about this other theme. For me, when I read your first novel, A Good Girl, the very first page of your debut novel is a family tree. I think it's 5 generations, the real power of family. But I then, through all of your writing, I feel like the idea of family and what we learn in our roles in family is a critical component to how you tell us about characters and about life. And I wondered if has that evolved for you as you've been writing, like from that first novel to even what you're working on now. Has that role of family in your storytelling changed at all?
Well, I believe I have different forms of family. So I'm always writing about women and self-discovery and their role within a family. It could be a divorced family, generational family where people live together in one home or one small town. In the book that'll come out in late 22, family is simply created because of the great need a 73-year-old woman and a 14-year-old girl clutch to each other to protect each other. There is no blood relation.
Yeah.
Much like in how we came to be. There's many different forms of family, but there's always that basic element that people feel accepted and loved in whatever that family may be, whether it's
Yes.
traditional or.
Yes, and it's where all of our stories begin, right? Whether on a good foot or not. It's so apart. I think everybody can relate to that. Everybody can think to how family has shaped them and how we interact with the world. I love that you just brought up women, because for me, that is one of the things I love about every one of your stories is I feel like I meet women that I'm never going to forget, that stay with me in different ways. And I just so appreciate that. I wanted to give you a chance to talk a little bit about your TEDx talk, because I think that to me was also about being a woman and the role of women. And I know that was in 2021. Did you record that in 2021?
November
November
20.
of 20, right? So can you talk a little bit about because we are all sort of time stamped into 2020 now, aren't we? Like what we remember of that year. Can you talk about what your inspiration was for that talk?
Well, I got the invitation to prepare a talk based on that theme of fearless women. And of course, it was the height of COVID, social unrest, political unrest, such a divided nation that I certainly didn't experience in my lifetime. Such grief, such hatred, just a horrific time for so many different reasons. And so I thought about, well, what is the human story? No matter if you live in Jefferson, Texas, Budapest, Baton Rouge, New Orleans, Paris, what connects us as human beings? So you'll hear in that opening speech, the thing that connects us despite geography, religion, and race,
right,
is the need to love and be loved. And I certainly didn't invent the importance of love and being loved. That the phrasing those two things together was done by a French author who wrote under a man's name. Sam is the last name. Female writer had to write under a man's name to be accepted. But in going with that theme of love and being loved, that's universal. We all want to be accepted. We all want to know that our story is just important as the particular person with the microphone in their hand for the moment.
Right. Yes.
And there was so much of that in 2020. So as an older woman, I began thinking about, how does our idea of love begin? It begins in the family. You know, that's where we first get the model of love and trust.
Right.
Now, it could be terrific or it could be heartbreaking, and I write about both situations. But, you know, we have a choice later on as adults in how we want to fill that void if we didn't receive the love we needed as a child. And there are positive ways to do that. And unfortunately, there are very negative ways to do that. And from there, I talked about fearless women. You know, fearless women doesn't necessarily mean the woman that made the cover of Time it could be the single mom going to work every single day.
Yeah.
And her treat to her family is a delivery pizza. She's accomplished something. That woman is fearless
Mm-hmm.
in that she knows the reality of that situation. And that's why I wrote about a single mom and how we came to be, made her my protagonist. Not that I've been a single woman with children, but I've worked with a lot of single women with children. Their work never ends. That's
Yeah.
24/7. So, and I also wanted to celebrate the older women that, you know, after 50, we become invisible in our culture. And there's a wonderful writer, oh my gosh, Isabel Allende. And she wrote a book, it might have come out last year, Soul of a Woman.
Hmm.
The wisdom in that. And that she said, only in France will a woman over 40 be considered somewhat interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, I
So
thought that was
I thought about that quite a bit, Theresa, and I played with the idea of a book called The Invisible Woman, but I decided to develop a character that is 73, that there's a love triangle with this woman involved at 73.
well, let's
She
talk
takes
about
on-
that.
Oh,
Yeah,
well,
let's talk about it.
Hannah and Ariella. It's just that I wanted a woman in her 70s to be viewed as powerful, strong, fearless. And as I mentioned in the TED Talk, it's not really until after 50 we began figuring it all out. I mean, we could quote the song Alfie, right?
Right.
You know,
Right.
there are some days at 59, I said, okay, what's this really all about? But I think that's when we come into our own and that we feel comfortable with who we are. We're comfortable in our skin and we start speaking out and we become fearless. So I just wanted to create a character of that sort of courage. And Susan, I'm reading your thing. Yes, the 70s are the new 40s. I love it, Susan. So, you know, that's up to us. We don't have to have the media or a person holding the microphone at a particular moment in history saying, you know, you can't do it in your 70s. It's up to us to say, yes, we can, and I will, and watch me, step back.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I love that you've created a character that exemplifies that in your next novel. And I know that it is a little bit different than what you've written in the past in that there is more danger involved. There is more crisis involved too. And so I think that's an interesting growth arc for you. I'm so excited for 2022 and for its release.
It is, and just very quickly, my family has a home 100 miles from the border in West Texas.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a gathering place where we all get together and we could get off the grid. And if I want to talk to someone, I have to walk up a hill to get to make a connection or to use the internet. That's how remote it is.
That's disconnected, right? Yes.
Absolutely. And we have been subscribing to the daily newspaper of Junction, Texas. And Kim Davis was born in that area. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of ranches, and the cultural diversity has been there for 200, 300 years. It just didn't happen with the media 1-2 years ago, talking about the crisis on the border. But in this newspaper, I'm reading reports about the human trafficking and the statistics from the US Department of Transportation. Every 30 seconds, a woman, a girl is put into human trafficking, either the sex trade, slave labor, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's an epidemic. I followed these news stories. I was curious about it, in the fact that this little bitty town, maybe population a couple of thousand, is dealing with this. Their local police. So I followed this trend for quite a while, and I just began writing the story. I worked with a woman out of Houston, Pamela Labata. She's originally from Colombia, and she is a healthcare provider and operates a clinic in Houston for victims of human trafficking. And though, of course, for patient privacy, I wasn't given the names, but I learned a lot from her. And I guess for me as a writer, and many of the authors here, and thank you for spending your time with me, it was a new thing for me. I do write about violence in my other novels, but not to this extreme. I have to share that there were some days in writing this manuscript that I had to stop, because it was simply all I could take physically and mentally in the writing process. So yeah, so that's Hannah and Ariella.
Yes.
And I've had a lot of people help me with this, that are with us today. Joanne Easley, met her in Kerrville, Texas. And Joanne lives right outside of the Junction area. So she would be familiar with some of those stories.
I love that you put your energy into something that could shine a light on something of epidemic proportions that we aren't really made aware of, that it's not in the collective consciousness. I love that you tap into that. And I love that you just brought up community, because I think that is that's kind of at the heart of what I've tried to do in the podcast. Is it really was inspired by what you mentioned in the TED Talks, not feeling connected and feeling like there was so much negative, and feeling like I wanted to connect more to storytellers. And one of the things that I noticed as I looked back on the year was that the authors that were the most listened to, that had the highest number of people going in and clicking and spending their time and energy to listen to what that author had to say, were often, or even exclusively really, entrenched in community. They were seeking connection with readers and other writers, many times through book clubs, like the Pulpwood Queen, like Prose in the Pandemic with Eileen Sanchez, Bookish Road Trip. You called out Sue Peterson earlier, Sue's Reading Neighborhood. I think that the amount of community that's out there, once we start dipping our foot looking for it, is wonderful. I wonder, what advice do you have for readers and writers who are seeking that kind of community and help as they're going through the process?
Well, I think it's very important, and I don't think I'm saying anything new. And Jeanette Brown, I see you too, and thank you for your help with Ariella and Hannah. I think it's very important that we remember, as authors, as writers, our books and who we are one and the same. That's what the reader's looking for. They want to connect with you as much as they want to read your book. That's probably the biggest thing I've learned about the reader community. And there's many different ways you could do that. Certainly there's all these great people, like the Pulpwood Queens and all the women that support us on Facebook with their virtual book clubs. I had a book come out the last week of February 2020, and the next week the whole world closed. And
Yes.
It's all of these people, all the ones that you have mentioned, that if it wasn't for them, that book would have went nowhere. And when you're connected with the publisher, and there's publishers on this panel today, thank you. It's not just about me in my book, but I'm connected to a publisher. I'm connected to the people that work to the publisher, the distribution. That book doesn't move. None of those people make money. And the sad thing that happened in 2020, so many of the little indie bookstores closed down. So how do we build community
Yeah.
with readers and authors and publishers? It's a trilogy. We
Yeah.
have to support each other, helping.
Others. That is another way, to use your analogy, of breaking out of our bubble, because there's this really intimate relationship, I think, between author and reader, that what you have to say and how I interpret it, how I feel it, how it impacts me is very specific to me. But when I read collectively with others, I get to feel and see the author's story from a different perspective, maybe.
I agree with you. And that's what I call the magic of art, whether it's a painting, textiles, because what that creator feels in producing that art and offering it to the world.
Yeah.
That's really what you're doing. That art is taking everything in your heart and your mind and saying, here, I don't know how you're going to receive this.
Right.
And when that reader, when that person buys the textile, buys the pottery, they're going to see something in there that triggers something the author may have never thought of, because it's so interconnected and personal. That's the magic of art. There could be a painting in your home hanging in the same position for 20 years, and one day, could be during 2020, when you're thinking about things differently, you look at that and you see something you never saw before in that art. That's the magic of the arts.
Yes. And I think too that we experience different, we were just talking about stages of life, and when we come into our own, when we feel, decade by decade, how we go through our own transformations. I think that's so true in how we interpret and interact with art, that those things evolve with us, right? That you could read a book that you read in your 20s and reread it again in your 50s or 60s and have a new experience.
I had a teacher in high school that loved William Faulkner. Mm. And I tried, but I was 16 years old. I didn't know anything about life. And I remember in my 50s, I was reading as I lay dying on a flight. I could not stop crying on the plane. To the point where the man sitting next to me, "Are you okay, Miss?"
Oh my gosh.
Right.
Clearly, we have to mature to understand the work of, yes, a genius, Faulkner, all those great writers. We have to mature in our growth as how we understand the world, how we understand people, situations.
I agree. Thank you so much. And I think we're in our last few minutes, and I just want to take a moment to let everybody know that attended that I personally am just so thrilled to see all of your faces. I appreciate you taking time out of what is always a busy day, never a not busy day, I think. And so thank you for taking the time to be here with us. If you, I think Mandy has made sure that our contacts and our info is in the chat. Is that right, Mandy? Yes. Okay. So if you're on Facebook, I feel like that is a really, it's a good space to like authors' pages and stay in touch. So for me too, for the podcast, I would love it if you leave me a comment on Desiduratam's Facebook and tell me that you saw me here. I think what I'll do is go through the chat there, anybody that comments in the Desiduratam page and Facebook, and anybody that commented in this chat. And we'll just go through randomly and select people to receive copies of Johnny's audiobooks that I've had the privilege of narrating. I feel like, is
Teresa?
that okay, Mandy? Is that okay if I do that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Teresa,
Okay.
we have just like 5 minutes. So if somebody had a
Okay.
question or
Sure.
brief, we'll open it up. So if anybody wants to ask something, I'm going to put mine back on gallery view. Anybody have a question or comment or anything to Teresa or Johnny? Wasn't that an amazing panel, y'all? This is just so incredible.
Johnny's incredible.
And
Thank
I
you.
was trying to say, I think if you Googled TEDx talk, you can find Johnny's. She did it last year, gave us the link at our annual book club convention, but you've got to watch it. It's really terrific. Anybody?
It's on YouTube.
Okay,
Yeah.
Janet, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to
Janet,
know more about narrating Johnny's book, because I now have 2 audiobooks coming out, and it's a whole new way of having your novel created. I have a wonderful narrator for my Norwegian novels.
Oh,
But it
I'm
makes
so glad.
all the difference in the world to have an outstanding. So tell me how you worked with Johnny and her novel, bringing that to life as an audio.
Well, I was really fortunate. As I started narrating, I got onto the largest marketplace first, which is called ACX.
Mhm.
And that is where I first interacted, saw her book up for auditions. So authors can put their books up for auditions, publishers put books up for auditions, and it's sort of like a giant casting call. So it's funny that you ask how we first met, because I feel like I was just meant to know Johnny. I felt like I was meant to read her stories. They just,
We all feel that way.
yes, I guess that's true. I'm not alone in that. It was a really random event, a huge casting call for it. And then once I think you find a narrator that hears your voice, I think it's such a delicate thing. The author has so much personally invested in the storytelling that it is really important to connect with a narrator that understands that. And that sounds right in your head. I was just telling somebody recently, I used to feel like it was such a competition, that I would audition and I would be anticipating being accepted and feeling that very personally. And I've really, over the last year and a half, decided that what's meant to be will be when it comes to the audiobook narration. And I think from an author perspective and a narrator perspective, it's really good to know that if you're the right voice for it, it'll happen. And if you're not, you probably don't want you don't want a job. You don't want that job. And so I trust the process. And I think anyone is welcome actually to email me and ask and tell me about their projects. And I'm happy to connect you with the network of people that I've been privileged to meet, producers and other narrators. I wanted to also just thank Kathy again. I'm not sure I've said this enough, but I just really, really appreciate her and her team for putting this together for all of us. I'm already booking episodes of her picks for the Desiduratam podcast, season 2 this year. River Jordan, Randy Samuelson Brown, Julia Daly, Robert Gwaltney. I already have a list. You just fill me up, Kathy. You fill my cup, and I'm so grateful the way that you connect me to the authors and artists and wordsmiths and ultimately friends that I meet through you.
We're grateful for you, Teresa, and you, Johnny. You guys are rock stars, man. But we're out of time. We've got to have enough time to download these before the next one begins. So we're taking a quick break, and we'll be back on the hour for our next wonderful event. And it's coming up with Grace Salmon and her podcast, The Storyteller. So we'll see you soon. Y'all grab a snack, and we'll see you back at 3:00. Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone. Much
Everybody.
love.
Big love. Big book love. Okay.
Big love.
Fantastic.